Okay. Ah. Good evening, everyone. Just before the event starts, we're going to try and do a little bit of filming. So there's going to be a drone that's going to fly over our heads in a moment. If you guys could all do me a favor and pretend that there is no drone. Just continue looking towards the stage. Do not look at the drone. Okay? Thank you. There is no drone. It's true. All right, the drone is now gone.
Boa noite, good evening, and welcome to the third event of the R series on artificial intelligence. R is a science communication initiative here at Champalamo Foundation. I'm Sabine, a postdoctoral researcher here at the center in the Vision to Action Lab, and your host for this evening. Back in December, we discussed with you the concept of intelligence and how natural intelligence comes in diverse forms, from flies and fungi to birds and primates like us. This is very much like the diverse artificial intelligence systems that are part of our lives for decades now, from the autocomplete on your phone, the algorithms which choose which adverts land in your social media feeds, to the now popular large language models like Llama and ChatGPT. Thiago Marques showed us how much of the impressive AI systems that we see today have already been developed in the mid-20th century, and after decades of what we know is called the AI winter, only become powerful today due to the massive increase of computational power and the abundance of labeled data that come from our lives being increasingly lived online. In March, we discussed with a range of speakers from the field of law, education, engineering, and art how the different AI systems are impacting our lives today. If you missed the events, you can still watch them on our YouTube channel. Latest AI models are getting better and better in understanding the concepts of our physical world, our behavior, and maybe one day our innermost drive. A fact that can be exciting, but at the same time unsettling if you think about the power associated with such knowledge. Tonight, we will explore with you the future of AI, a future that has not yet been written, but is shaped with every decision and every action we do. Our speakers, Dr. Luis Guerra, Dr. Kevin Mitchell, and Dr. Pusha Viswanathan, will walk you through their considerations about the future of AI, touching on safety, agency and autonomy, and ethics. We will then open for a roundtable discussion, for which we highly encourage you to send us your questions. If you feel comfortable, you can send them in English or in Portuguese. We still have human intelligence to translate them. You can scan the code now with your phone, or we will have it projected on the site during the evening. So without further ado, I will pass the word to Dr. Scott Rennie, a postdoctoral researcher here at the Institute at the Systems Neuroscience Lab, and my co-host for this evening.
Thank you, Sabine. Welcome, everyone. Well, I'm sure if you're here, you will not have failed to notice that artificial intelligence has been on the news a little bit lately. It seems like every day a new benchmark or capacity has been established by new AI systems. For example, I believe my slides are not working. There we go. So for example, GPT-4 has recently passed the bar exam. The bar exam is something that Americans are required to take if they want to practice law. Generative AI has also managed to synthesize structurally novel antibiotics. Artificial intelligence has also been shown to be as good or better than radiologists in screening for lung cancer. The same is also true for breast cancer. The Israeli army is currently using AI to identify tens of thousands of targets in Gaza in the ongoing bombing, which is occurring as we speak this evening. At the same time, AI has also been used to detect over 27,000 near-Earth asteroids that weren't previously noticed, and was used in the recent DART mission by NASA to target and impact an asteroid for planetary defense. It's even being used to change the flavor of beer. Now, it doesn't just seem as though there is more research coming out. What I'm showing you here is a graph of the number of AI publications in the world from 2010 to 2022. On the vertical axis is the number of publications in thousands, and across the horizontal axis is years. And as you can see, from 2017 onward, there's a rapid increase until over 242,000 papers were published on AI in 2022. If we now look at patents, we see a very similar pattern. From 2017, there's an increase, but this time it's even steeper. So this is all happening kind of quickly. One of the many questions that we forced you guys to ask when signing up for this event was, at which speed do you think AI should progress over the next 5 years to benefit humanity the most? And to our surprise, more than half of you thought that this fast pace of AI was fine or should go faster. And so far, apart from this plot, all the data I have showed you is from 2022. And 2023 seems to be a particularly standout year for artificial intelligence. So what I'm showing you here is a survey of thousands of machine learning and AI specialists. And this is their estimation for two important parts of AI capabilities that will happen in the future. One is the rather optimistic full automation of labor, which is them doing all jobs. And the other is high-level machine intelligence, so AI systems that are similarly as smart as we are. And in 2022, they thought that these things would occur at this date. But in 1 year alone, they've revised these estimates quite dramatically. So for high-level machine intelligence, they've revised this to be 11 years earlier. And for full automation of human jobs, they've advanced it 38 years. This doesn't mean that any of these things will actually happen or that these predictions are accurate, but what it does begin to show is that the future is becoming increasingly unpredictable. Given this fast pace of unpredictable development of AI, which is being driven by a very small number of powerful companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, Meta, and Microsoft, what do the CEOs of those companies have to say about this future? And so far, what those CEOs seem to say is that there's a coming AI utopia. They've been announcing with ever more volume and confidence that AI will predict, anticipate, and provide for all our needs. Demis Hassabis, the CEO of DeepMind, has argued that AI will bring about, and I quote, a new era of radical abundance, curing all diseases, spreading consciousness to the stars, and maximum human flourishing. Sam Altman, the CEO behind OpenAI and ChatGPT, has said, we can build AGI, we can colonize space, we can get nuclear fusion to work, we can get solar to mass scale. He also thinks we can cure all human diseases, and that we can build new realities. The weird thing is that these same people who are talking about an AI utopia are also warning of an AI apocalypse. That very same Sam Altman has described superhuman artificial intelligence, which is the thing that he's spending this money trying to build, as the greatest existential threat that faces humanity. There's an increase in AI safety research, which is tightly linked to these companies, and they've made, with the most abstract cases, arguments that full-scale nuclear war and catastrophic climate change are less of a threat than AI. This draws on a lot of the intuitions we get from Hollywood, which paints a picture of artificial intelligence which can be apocalyptic and scary, but it's entertaining and not very often accurate. And so, these two radical positions, utopia and apocalypse, might sound as though they're in opposition. And superficially, they are. Apocalypse and utopia are different things. But in reality, they both argue the same thing, that artificial intelligence is extremely powerful, that it will reshape our lives in ways that are unimaginable, and more than anything else, that AI is inevitable. So what happens with this kind of dialogue? So on one hand, it drives the hype around artificial intelligence, hype that is required to justify the fact that to train the large models that these AI systems are based on uses the energy of a small country. Even more importantly, this sort of fantastical view of the future polarizes people and plays into our fears and makes discussion difficult. It proves as a distraction. It distracts us from the fact that these companies are structurally and necessarily constrained by the same things that constrain other corporations: profit, growth, and market value. And it makes it hard to discuss the very real world, very everyday, practical ways in which we can try and make AI better and safer. However, nothing about AI is inevitable. So what can we do to change the trajectory of this powerful new technology? One option is legislation. So in the Living with AI event, Jacobina discussed in more detail the EU AI Act. And essentially, this act is the first act by a major global regulator to produce a comprehensive set of regulations on artificial intelligence, including rules on quality, data transparency, and accountability. One of the main things that it actually regulates is facial recognition. So facial recognition technology comes with a range of problems. It can be biased, it can be inaccurate, it can violate privacy and lead to civil liberties violations. And this is now strictly controlled under a ban on mass surveillance in the EU AI Act. And interestingly, the first city to ban facial recognition technology was San Francisco, which is where much of this technology originated. And if we look at the trajectory of regulations over time, here I'm showing you first the EU. Again, vertical axis is a number, this time not in thousands. And the horizontal axis is time. And we can see that the number of AI-regulated regulations is growing. Now, if we zoom out a little bit, and we look at the number of AI mentions in the world in 80 selected countries, we can see again that the numbers of times that AI is mentioned in legislatures is also increasing, but perhaps not at the same rate as the technology is. Another approach to this is industrial action. So very publicly, in 2023, the writers and performers unions in Hollywood took industrial action that disrupted Hollywood's attempts to use generative AI to undermine the safety of their careers. This industrial action has, for now, ensured that writers will not be replaced by large language models that are trained on the work that they themselves wrote, and that performers will have some control over how their likenesses and images are used in film. And here, what I'm showing you are 3 Portuguese artists, Regina Pessoa, Fuel, and Vils. They've all recently joined a class action suit against 2 generative AI companies, Stability AI and Midjourney. Those are companies that use vast amounts of image data on the internet to train their artificial intelligence models to produce more images. And these are copyright cases because work similar to theirs can be produced from that data. Other companies, like the New York Times, is pursuing similar legal action. The thing about these cases that makes them powerful is that if they're successful, it changes the relationship that AI companies have with the text and images that they need to train their models. The thing is that legislative action, both legislative, industrial, and legal actions are all ways in which we can interact and change the trajectory of artificial intelligence. But legislative action tends to be slow. We don't always get the politicians we'd like or the ones that we vote for. And sometimes protest is required to encourage them to do the right thing. And also, industrial and legal action tend to be reactive rather than proactive. And besides, before we engage in any of these actions, we need to know what it is that we want from artificial technology and what we don't. And that's the purpose of this evening. It is to avoid the distracting hype of apocalypse and utopia, and to discuss how we should shape tomorrow's intelligence. And our 3 speakers this evening, Luis, Kevin, and Pooja, are each going to discuss that. I'm going to start by addressing one of the answers to your questions, which was we asked you, when do you think AI will reach or surpass human-level intelligence in most tasks? Again, somewhat to our surprise, more than half of the audience here thought that we would have human-level artificial intelligence within 20 years, which is really, really very soon. And there's some reason why people might believe this. So what I'm showing you now is some data from the AI Index in 2024. And what this is showing is the best performance of a range of specific and distinct individual AI algorithms that are trained on 9 different capabilities that are seen as fundamental to human intelligence. So what I'm showing is things like image classification, visual common sense reasoning, like competition-level maths, and English language understanding. And what you can see, the trajectory is pretty dramatic. They're all rapidly getting up towards human-level capabilities. So this raises the question, what do we want artificial intelligence to be like as it becomes more like our own? Megan O'Geeblin, in a recent book, God, Human, Animal, Machine, makes one important point on this topic. She argues that metaphors can act as mirrors. This probably doesn't come to surprise as most people, but the way we describe complex things in our environment, we tend to turn those metaphors around to describe ourselves. Sometimes when people are going through a hard time or they're dealing with an emotional situation, we might say that they're processing. a phrase in English from when steam engines were the most complicated thing that we had. When someone was tired, we would say they're running out of steam. Now, these are fairly harmless metaphors. But let me give you an example from large language models. So, large language models, rather than reading or understanding things like we do, instead, they probabilistically generate the next letter or next token in a string. That's how they produce the text that seems so intelligent. They don't understand what they have ingested. They parrot back to us the things we have told them. And this is what has led to them being referred to as random or stochastic parrots, which is fine. However, the CEO of OpenAI has said that I am a stochastic parrot, and so are you. And in so doing, he's saying that we're not people who understand things deeply. He's saying that we're simply random text generators that sometimes get the right answer. And it's true that sometimes we're given tasks that make us feel that way. I'm currently learning the theory for my Portuguese driving exam. My Portuguese is not great, so I do feel like I'm taking in a bunch of information that I don't really understand and trying to regurgitate it to get the right answers. And this happens a lot with exams. So for example, at the start, I talked to you about the GPT-4 passing the bar exam. And this is a hard exam. It's necessary to be a lawyer. A lawyer is an important and difficult job to do, and many humans fail. So the fact that this AI algorithm can seem to pass this exam might make you think that maybe AI could be a functional lawyer. However, what if I were to tell you that the bar exam doesn't predict how good a lawyer humans are? It also doesn't predict how ethical a lawyer humans will be. Being a lawyer, just like many other human occupations, it's more than can be captured in a test. It involves things like creativity, motivation, insight, capriciousness, ethics, and more. These things are not captured in one exam, just as intelligence was not captured in those 9 metrics that I showed you earlier. Humans are more diverse than can be captured in any simple test. There's one example of this I particularly like, which is synesthesia. So many of you are probably aware, but synesthesia is the experience of blended senses. So there are people that hear colors, see sounds, or associate visually certain colors with different letters or numbers. Now, this was known somewhat, but it wasn't widely known until recently. It was only discovered in 1880 by Francis Galton. In 2016, a similar but almost the opposite condition was discovered called aphantasia. Aphantasia refers to people who experience the world without any internal mental imagery. So when they close their eyes and they try to imagine something, they see nothing. And we only found out about this recently. Yet, we have every reason to believe that for thousands of years, people have had these experiences of the world. There are many people who have been sitting probably next to someone else, and they're having a vivid, multisensory, blended experience, and the person they're sitting next to has no mental energy whatsoever, and both people think the person sitting next to them is viewing the world the same way that they would. The diversity of the way we experience the world is something we're only beginning to understand. So to say that we're reaching some sort of AI similarity of human intelligence is almost a falsehood, because we're still learning to understand our own. And human diversity is dynamic. Some people can become displaced, disabled, or otherwise marginalized. And these experiences of the world are hardly imagined by many of the engineers that are working in the companies that make these AI systems. And the data that would come from these people is frequently underrepresented in the data used to train their models. Paul Auster says this very well. He says that everyone reads a different book, everyone sees a different film. We bring our past lives to whatever work of art that we are experiencing at that moment, and that's what makes it interesting. And I'm arguing that that's what makes us interesting. That's why we're not stochastic parrots. It's not mathematics. There are different answers for different people. So, that question I asked before, what do we want from an artificial intelligence as it becomes more like our own? We have a choice. Do we want an artificial intelligence that predicts simplified versions of ourselves, that treats us as stochastic parrots and just tries to understand how we behave? Or do we want artificial intelligence that helps us explore and understand ourselves? This is not a binary decision, of course. This is not one we can just make once and have done. It's not an issue like utopia or dystopia where it's over and done. Instead, we have to make this choice system by system, application by application. We have to decide with whatever replaces Google search? Do we want something that forces us into filter bubbles and echo chambers, or something that understands our own agency and what we want? For whatever replaces Instagram in the next years, do we want another more powerful weapon in the attention economy, trying to constantly get our attention, or something that shows us things that we want and things from people we care about? And we don't have to replace TikTok with anything, actually. It can just go. And there's also YouTube. A lot of that content is already now generated by generative AI. We have to think about whether we want applications like this that intend to flatten and simplify us so they can predict our choices and hold our attention, or whether we want things that are interested in our uniqueness and are able to train and help us explore that. We'll even have to think about this with the next thing that replaces ChatGPT, because it's not going to be around probably all that long. Now, this means that we have to stay vigilant. And looking to the future, we'll have to decide, again, system by system, whether it's coercing and erasing and oppressing who don't already fit within the existing algorithms that it uses, or whether we will develop systems that become increasingly aware of our own agency, our uniqueness, and autonomy. This will be particularly important in the fields of medicine, when they move beyond predicting things like cancer and start predicting things like our general health and even our psychological health. It'll be important for deciding how we go to war and how we use those systems in conflict with others. And it's going to be important in deciding how we educate our children. So this evening's event is about how we would shape tomorrow's intelligence. And I would make the first argument that tomorrow's intelligence should be one that is interested in us, in our uniqueness, in our agency, and not simply in trying to predict what we do next. Thank you. And now I'd like to pass the floor to Luis.
So good evening, everybody. Thank you, Sabine and Scott, for the invitation. They invited me here and they gave me some slack to share some thoughts about the future of AI. And I'm going to start with a kind of a small provocative decision, binary decision. I guess you all know this very nice character. We would all appreciate that the future of AI would be something like this, or something like this. You also know these characters from the AI movie. And I'm going to make a very simplistic option now, that is to produce this also very nice character, as you, some of you might know, that compare the human species to viruses. Of course, to this, my provocation is going to be centered also in this image of the same movie. It's in The Matrix, where the human is invited to choose between the red pill and the blue pill. The blue pill will continue living happily forever, let's say, in his environment, and the red pill is going to induce him to take some actions towards the state of the system. But before going a little bit deeper into the options we have, I'm going to make an excuse of not making any predictions about the future of AI, although I work in AI. And I'm going to give you some reasons for you to judge by yourself. There are some of these letters that appear here that probably to most of you don't make any sense. For those that are familiar with machine learning, you will recognize some techniques and one technology. So the techniques are all the four of them. The technology is the GPU. And basically, the numbers that are below are the dates where they appeared. So we noticed that these names and these techniques and technologies started appearing in 69, 85, etc., and the last of them in 1997. And at the time, in 1997, no one predicted what, because all of the others were present, what the merge of these techniques and technologies would produce 12 years later. So, which was is known as the Big Bang of deep learning, a work that was published by Andrew Ng and colleagues in 2009. And recurred to the latest version of the GPU, which was a technology that appeared in the 80s, originally designed to help computer graphics, so in the computers. And even in 2009, after, well, this generated lots of work afterwards, et cetera, I think hardly anyone could predict that a few years later, 6 years later, Google of itself, that had never manufactured any hardware, produced a new version of this technology of the GPUs called the TPUs, the tensor processing units, that were specific for machine learning. And we were in 2000, I think this is falling, sorry. And we were in 2015, and after that, these technologies continued to grow, etc. And without, to my knowledge, and I don't know if you know anyone that had predicted this evolution in 12 years, in 6 years, etc., etc. So I hope that you can excuse me of not making predictions, but I will share some thoughts that derive from my knowledge in the area. And this one is not about predictions, but although it would be interesting to discuss this with the evolutionary biologists to know, after knowing what has gone in evolution. This is supposed to be the beginning of the universe, so some 15 billion years ago. And we see here a billion years. This is in a logarithmic scale. And we see basically how life, different forms of life appeared on Earth. And what I wanted to share with you here is that the Homo sapiens and hominids appeared very, very lately here in this evolutionary scale. Okay, and this led some authors, in particular Hans Moravec in 1988, to say that symbolic reason, so that type of reasoning that humans should excel, in particular in symbolic games like chess and other types of reasoning, requires little computation compared to sensory motor capabilities that took millions of years to evolve and into several types of animals, and including the humans. So given this, I currently, probably you've seen this type of this robot, the Atlas robot, that is one of the most able robots nowadays, mechanically speaking. It is able to jump, to do parkour, etc. But when it appeared in 2016, it could already jump and do stuff like this. But it had these difficulties. You notice here, perhaps, the QR codes, and they were spread out in doors and boxes, etc., that it had to deal with, because the vision capabilities of the robot were poor compared to those that we had. It could not distinguish doors, etc., etc. So you remember, if you remember the previous slide where Hans Moravec said that sensory motor capabilities, it has good motor capabilities, not that good in terms of sensor capabilities. So it's a difficulty in spite of the current state of AI, that is still a difficulty we have. And now, I selected a few aspects that I think the current state of AI we should observe at least to make predictions more informed than if we didn't know these aspects. The first one is technology. So and I give a simple example, not with computers and AI, but with the flight. Okay, we have three domains of animals here, the insect, bird, and a fish, all that with capability of flying, all with these appendages or similar to, that are wings or similar to that. But we saw in the early 19th the first airplane, so which has wings, but the propulsion is quite different. And in some 40 years afterwards appeared the first jet plane. This is not the first one, but the largest and one that I like very much, but some years afterwards, a different form of propulsion. And curiously, only in 2013, we saw in public, although there were reports of another one in 1974, but it was a CIA device, of a small robot-like insect, a flying insect. So you see this is a quarter coin. It's similar to the 50 cents or so coin, and it's a very small insect that flapped wings with a high frequency, 120 hertz. And you see that this is just an example to say that although we are inspired by nature, in many ways, we solve problems in a different way. And with AI, this happens also. So the technology is different. The intelligence technology is different in the computers. Another aspect is energy. This is, we could select others, but I think this is the strongest one. You see the units that are here presented. This is 10 to the minus 16 joules per operation per second in the human brain, estimated. And in a computer, it's 10 to the minus 8 joules per operations per second. So it's a joule is a unit of energy. And this means that roughly that the brain is 100 million times more efficient energetically than the computers, okay? And this is significant because, as Scott already mentioned, the current engines of AI, the large language models, they consume the energy of a small country. It's estimated. These authors, Stifel and Kogan, last year published a paper where they analyzed this. And they said, for those that have some doubts, and they ventured to predict it, that the emergence of ASI is an artificial superintelligence is highly unlikely in the foreseeable future based on current computer architectures, primarily due to the energy constraints. So, and this brings us to another aspect, that is embodiment. All forms of intelligence that we know are embodied, okay? I believe that you all agree. Some of you may be doubtful of the top bottom corner. Yes, this is a plant, and no one less than Darwin himself was the first to discuss in a book called The Power of Movement in Plants, that the plants showed some signs of intelligence. So you may think of this. Okay, now, artificial intelligence is considered by many as not embodied. Perhaps, but my challenge is that we need to think of it as an intelligence that will be embodied in a near future. Sometimes it's already, in the sense that it is a networked intelligence. And this is different from anything that we have seen. We don't need to be an artificial intelligence, our network intelligence. You can pick your phone and check the temperature in New Zealand at this moment, or if it's raining in Chile or something like that, okay? So AI, in a certain sense, can profit from these interconnections that the internet provides and embody itself in a different way. So this is a challenge for your thoughts. Another aspect is the pervasiveness of artificial intelligence. And I saw I think the last event, and there was someone here presenting an inquiry that the Champalimaud Foundation did to the people that were present here before that, when they were choosing buying the tickets, about the the estimated number of times that each one of them interacted with AI on a daily basis. And I was surprised that the highest number of responses was 1 to 3 or something like that. And if you take a look at the things that are here depicted, I believe that anyone, I mean, if you only touch your cell phone up to 3 times per day, then okay, you're all right. But otherwise, even so, if you take the buzz, probably you have this is, oops, sorry. This is to represent the rostering of buzzes and so ways. So that is made usually by AI in many companies. Everybody interacts with all these applications several times per day. When you interact with your bank, when you have maps, the simple fact that you use elevators in a modern building that has more than 2 or more elevators probably has some, well, simplistic AI behind. Okay, so we interact with AI, and this is another aspect that is related to the previous one. What if all these devices are interconnected? And another aspect, still a technological one, is that AI, so artificial intelligence, gives us unnatural possibilities, let's say that. And I present here an example of a paper that was published a couple of months ago about an experiment that was done with a software that was able to play grandmaster level chess without search. So this was unheard of, okay? The chess players, natural and artificial ones, they all, even for those that don't play chess, basically what they do is the player imagines what's going to be the next move, and then imagines, okay, if I do this move, what are the moves that my opponent will do, the best one for him, and which would be the worst for me. And then if he makes that move, then I can make another move. And people and players, artificial players, tend to analyze that with some depth, of course, that is more limited to the humans than to the AI. But in this case, it was a proof of concept that a model, an artificial model, could do this virtually without any search. Okay, and the final aspect is the cyborgs or bionics or human-AI cooperation, which is connected to the previous one in the example that I give here, because this was first proposed by Garry Kasparov, world chess champion some years ago. And this is a type of chess where teams of humans and computers can play. Okay, so there's no limit. So humans, or 2 humans, and computers, or 2 or 3 humans, I don't know. But it's a small number, and they can use computers and humans to play against other teams of computers and humans. The interesting aspect is in 2005, I think it was the first cyborg chess tournament. It was won by a team of 2 players that were unheard of, nobody knew, and that used 3 personal computers. And they won against a grandmaster chef that was a chess player, sorry, that was playing with the help of a large computer. And analyzing the results, Garry Kasparov himself had produced this phrase that a weak human team plus a machine plus a superior process was greater than a strong computer, and remarkably greater than a strong human plus a machine with an inferior process. Okay, and this is quite interesting. So we see that the cooperation of humans and AI, where it can bring us. And I remembered when I was preparing this the previous slide that I had seen something about one of these large language models, and it was Gemini. I looked at it, and I have a snapshot here. If you Google Gemini, which is one of the large language models, competitor to ChatGPT, for those who don't know, the way it appears in Google is chat to supercharge your ideas, and says, get help with writing, etc., etc. So basically, it's inviting the user to to have a symbiotic relation with AI, which I believe is one of the most positive and interesting aspects that we can use AI currently in. I thought, okay, so if these engines are intelligent, and they are suggesting inviting people to do that, why don't I take advantage and I create here a slide, since I'm preparing the presentation, for the audience, and then I ask this a prompt, motivating cyborg for a presentation. And this is what DALL-E presented to me, which doesn't look very motivating to me. It has four images. I'm not sure if it is motivating to you. And if we look at detail of this image, you see that it has some letters there, garbled, that are not even, some of them are not even letters, maybe in some other alphabet. That doesn't make sense. There's no excuse, because, well, this was the title that I wrote after I've seen this. There was no excuse because some interesting, at least for me, aspects of a symbiosis between artificial intelligence and humans could be seen since 2011, and on the left with BCI, it's, brain-computer actuation in 2011. You see the lady here as an implant of a device that is directly implanted in the brain, and is able. She's able to translate her movements with some training, previous training, and she operated the robotic arm so that it picked the bottle and brought the bottle to her mouth so that she could drink by herself. And on the bottom side we have, so this is basically actuation, the person imagining thoughts to actuate over the robot, and on the bottom we have the reverse, the process. A person also paraplegic, paraplegic, yes, that has that lost sense of touch in the fingers, and here the experiment is moving these compliant hands, so the hand is the fingers can move. Is moving the hand, and the signal goes into the brain of the person. The person is blindfolded, and he's guessing and correctly all the movements in all the fingers that the experiment is producing. Okay, this is a very simple sketch of what I think about this cooperation between humans and machines. We have here the two axes, so the horizontal one of intelligence, the vertical one of speed and force. The human supposedly has high intelligence, but is limited in speed and force, at least compared to what we can achieve with machines, vehicles and power machines like bulldozers, etc. Now we could imagine that the cyborgs, if the machines are not intelligent, would endow the humans with more force and strength, but still high intelligence. And we could spend an whole evening talking about this singularity. This is the moment that it's a term that is used to designate the moment where artificial intelligence becomes capable of reproducing and maintaining itself without help of the humans. But I'm not sure if we reach this or not, but what I suggest is that in the between, before we arrive to that, the human and the computer and the machine can would always profit from this, and if the machine has more intelligence, perhaps the human team, as it did in the chess, is more valuable than the single machine or the single human. Okay, so to conclude, the artificial intelligence empowers humans for good things, in particular solving new and larger problems that humans, we by ourselves cannot handle, and solving them fast. Okay? On the other hand, it also amplifies the bad stuff in our society. For instance, unethical activities that are empowered by AI. We have the recent example of the Cambridge Analytica scandal, AI bots in social networks, fake news, fake images, fake videos, etc., and bias like racism and discrimination, which I put here in yellow, not because they are more important than the others, but because I hear often people saying AI is biased, AI has discrimination, etc. It's not AI. AI is trained with examples that we, as a society, produced. So the algorithms I know of AI, I don't know biased algorithms. Nobody wants to write biased algorithms, wants to write algorithms that we know that work well, okay? So if those algorithms pick up on data that is biased itself, of course, they're going to amplify it. It's like a lens, okay? And I have a question for you. Do you encourage all children to educate themselves looking at the internet, at the TV, etc., without supervision? I guess no one would venture to say yes, right? I hope. Okay, let me have another challenge for you. Or would we induce an automatic machine to learn with the driving behavior of the Portuguese drivers? Perhaps some of you will say yes, but I hope most would say no. So why should we let AI, which is less intelligent than the children, and choose and learn by itself with whatever it finds in the internet? Okay, so this is, of course, it's prone to have problems, of course. Okay. So there are other risks like manipulations by those that have the data and who have that technology. And as Virginia Dignam, researcher on AI ethics, says, those institutions currently are not democratic institutions. They are large companies of which we don't know what they do in this. We can only hope, if we use that they manipulate data correctly. It's already present, so it's something that we have to do, and we can do it by auditing and certification of AI devices. We do that in several aspects of our already that are critical in our society. For instance, aviation. Airplanes are certified. Everybody that works with airplanes is certified. We do that with health and food and drugs. Okay, we do that with new cars. We do that with justice. The judges and people that work in justice, the bar exams that Scott mentioned, they are to certify people that can practice. So we do that with doctors and with buildings and bridges, etc., etc. So there are means that we can that we have in practice that we can use to audit and produce safe devices. The AI Act already mentioned, I just highlight here the two keywords. It mentions high-risk AI systems, and this article is basically to say that the authorities should be granted access to the source code of artificial intelligence that works with high-risk problems. Okay, we can apply ethics to design. Pooja is going to talk about this, so I'm going to be very quick in mentioning that, quoting also Virginia Dignam, that it's three types of ethics. Ethics in design, so that transparent AI, so that we can question and the AI explains what it has done. Ethics by design, that integrates reasoning, ethical reasoning in AI device, and the ethicals for everyone that works with AI in some form, from the design until management of those systems. Pedro Domingos, a researcher on AI, a Portuguese researcher that works in University of Washington in the United States, Washington State University, says that AI's greatest risk is not having enough of it, okay? Enough of intelligence, of course. I would say that AI's greatest risk is using it without regulation. At dinner, I was commenting with the colleagues that no one of us would get into a plane that someone would tell us, oh, this is pilot. The pilot is an AI, and it's very good in playing the flight simulator, so you can fly the plane confidently, right? I guess nobody would venture to do that. So going a little bit in direction of Scott, shall we take measures of social conduct, including AI, or shall we sit and enjoy all AI gadgets that we can hold? Well, I have some pictures to show you, and I can show you that here my bias is clearly evident in the size of the pictures. I conclude with the last picture. I cannot make a presentation on AI without bringing up a picture of my favorite science fiction movie, which is Blade Runner 1982, but illustrating an aspect that is the opening scene of the movie, that is a human auditing a machine, an android, precisely to detect if it is a machine or if it is a human. Okay, thank you for your attention. Sorry,
Thank you, Luis. I'm very excited looking at your questions. So our next speaker is... Slide? Yeah. Our next speaker is Dr. Kevin Mitchell. He's an associate professor for genetics and neuroscience at Trinity College in Dublin. In his early research, he studied neurosystem development from simple to complex organisms. Now his work focuses on decoding the genetic program that specifies the wiring of our brain, especially with respect to differences in human faculties, psychiatric disorders, and perceptual conditions like synesthesia, as you heard before from Scott. Kevin is also a researcher and deep thinker in the topic of the biology of free will, which he brilliantly expresses in his books Innate, how the I think you're right. Sorry, how the wiring of the brain shapes who we are, and Free Agent, how evolution gave us free will. So, welcome with me, Dr. Kevin Mitchell.
Thank you. Thanks. Thanks, Sabine. Boa noite. I'm going to talk about souls, which may seem odd in a scientific discussion, but I hope you'll get the idea of what I mean. So I was reading a book recently which mentioned Goethe's play Faust, in which Faust, the main character, famously bargains away his soul. He gives his soul to the devil, sells it for knowledge. That's what he was after. All the knowledge in the world, that he may detect the inmost force which binds the world and guides its course. And this struck me when I was reading it, that there was a sort of a strange parallel, an inversion, if you will, with the way that some people in the AI world seem to think about intelligence. The idea being that this vision of artificial general intelligence is that we'll get these systems, we'll give them all the knowledge in the world, and a soul will pop out. They'll just get a soul. They'll become, in a sense, an entity or a self just by virtue of having all this data that we've fed them. So we'll take these large language models like ChatGPT that you heard about earlier, feed them ever more data, scale them up larger and larger, until they've consumed all the data on the internet, and then suddenly they'll become an entity. An idea that not only when we make these systems, not only will they become intelligent, they'll become an intelligence, an agent, an autonomous self, an entity through time. And usually this idea is accompanied by the idea that this could be a malevolent entity, one that will seek our destruction, usually pretty quickly. Now, what I want to argue is that order of things, of making things intelligent and expecting agency to pop out, is exactly the opposite of what happened in evolution. That's not how nature did it. Nature made agents first, whose job was just to survive, and it made systems that allow them to survive and act in the world, and then what we call intelligence came later. So the kinds of things that Luis was talking about, being able to play chess, do abstract logical reasoning, the sort of stuff that humans find difficult, that we're very impressed when computers can do, that's the easy stuff, computationally speaking. The hard stuff is training a robot to actually move the pieces around the board, physically speaking. So all that abstract reasoning evolved much later than these very basic kind of systems for control. Controlling, surviving, predicting, anticipating what's out in the world, knowing what to do in an adaptive sense. So intelligence, what we perceive as intelligence, is paid off in behavior. Intelligence is being able to use information based on past knowledge to make some useful predictions to guide adaptive behavior in novel scenarios. So problem solving, in essence, but paid out in terms of survival for all kinds of organisms. So we can think about cognition as sitting on top of those systems for organisms that just allow them to persist, allow them to control their environment and adapt to it in ways that favor their persistence and allow them to keep on going. And what's really interesting in the evolution of these systems is that we get the emergence of nervous systems that allow organisms to learn, not just through evolutionary time, but on an individual lifetime, learn about the world, learn about what they need to care about in the world, learn about the causal relations. So when I do this, that tends to happen. Learn about sequences of events, properties of objects. That's what organisms need to get around in the world. And it's intimately linked with the evolution of agency itself, the ability to act in the world as a self. So that idea of agents and selves and subjects is something that biology doesn't treat very well. It hasn't been thought of as the most important aspects of life, but really it's the defining characteristic that distinguishes living things from non-living things. Is living things are centers or loci of action, of control. They're subjects. They are the things that perceive what's out in the world. They are loci of concern. Some things in the world are important and relevant and salient to an organism, but many other things can be ignored. They need to know the difference, and then they have to be able to control things. They have to be able to control their own bodies in order to control things out in the world. So that's what evolution fashioned, was organisms with those kinds of systems that allow them to control things in the world and make sense of the world and act on it. In fact, make sense of the world by acting on it. Because that's exactly how they accumulate causal knowledge, is by causally intervening on the world. They're not like these large language models that just sit there and passively get all this data. They're having to go out and explore the world, they're having to get data, and they're having to test their hypotheses in order to build up this causal model. So I talked about some of these issues in the book that Sabine mentioned, which looked at, well, it looked at the question of free will in humans, but really from an evolutionary point of view. If you can ask of humans, how could it be that we have control to do anything, to cause anything, if we're just physical beings and so on? But you can ask the same question of a bacterium. How does a bacterium do anything in the world, right? How does a dog do anything? How does a frog do anything? Where does that causal power come from? And what I argued in the book is that it comes, first of all, through evolution, which is a learning algorithm, but then also through the individual learning that's supported by cognition of the individual agents. But it starts very, very simple. Nervous systems didn't evolve for learning. They evolved for moving. They evolved for action. So here's a picture of a simple marine creature called a hydra, which is like a little jellyfish about yay big, with lots of tentacles. It has a very, very simple nervous system. It's called a nerve net. It doesn't have a brain. It's just this diffuse kind of connection, and it has a very small repertoire of actions that it has to choose between. So that the nervous system is just for coordinating the various bits of a multicellular animal. That's how they started, at least. Of course, the good thing, if you have an ability to coordinate different movements, is to coordinate them in response to different conditions in the world. And you can see a few examples of that here, where they may elongate in response to light, or contract if there's food around, or make these different kinds of motions. So as evolution progressed and nervous systems got more complicated, these kinds of systems converged into what we call a brain, which is just a collection of lots of neurons, where here's an example from a little nematode that lives in the soil. It's actually a microscopic organism. It has exactly 302 neurons. Every one of them has exactly the same 302 neurons. And there's a collection of them in the brain. So this particular animal doesn't do much. It can move forward, it can move backwards, it can look for food, but its behavior is pretty limited. But what it can do is sense things in the environment. It can smell things, and it can touch things, and then it can coordinate its behavior in response to that. So here's a diagram of part of its nervous system, and those pink triangles at the top are sensory neurons. So those are detecting things out in the world, touch or smells. And then down at the bottom, the purpley ones, are the motor neurons that drive an action. Now, the important invention here in these organisms is the red ones in the middle. So the contact between sensation and action here is now separated. They're decoupled by a layer in the middle that can integrate these various signals. So we're starting to get some internalized cognition, even in a simple organism like a worm. But again, it's not directed towards any kind of abstract reasoning. It just needs to know what to do in different scenarios. This sort of scenario it gets more complicated when you get to vertebrates. These are a schematic of a lamprey, which is a very primitive kind of a fish. It has a few reflexes that are wired into its nervous system, where, for example, it will avoid big shadowy objects moving in its periphery that might be things that want to eat it, whereas it will move towards small things that it wants to eat, so prey that might be in the world, right? It needs to know the difference, and its visual system is wired up to enable it to approach these things and avoid those things. Okay. So now, these critters are pre-wired to have adaptive behavior, right? They're agents, they're doing things in the world, but they don't learn very much, really, because their nervous system is still fairly simple. What happened over evolution is that especially this part of the brain, the forebrain, just gets bigger and bigger, more and more complicated, enabling organisms to learn about the world and build models of the way the world works. That's what makes us different from other creatures. So over time, this forebrain, you're now seeing it in a side view, gets bigger and bigger and more complicated until it forms this huge cerebral cortex that we have, the huge wrinkly bit on the outside of our brains. And what this is designed to do is perceive what's out in the world, learn about it, recognize it, build up this store of knowledge, and then enable the organism to act on it. So here's an example from the visual system where data from incoming information from the eye goes to this part of the brain and then to the back of the brain here. It's called the visual cortex. Now, over these successive stages of visual processing, what the system is doing is extracting information about different types of things in the world. So these bits down here might be responsive to lines of different orientation, but once you get a little bit further up here, you're getting parts of the brain that are really responsive to things like faces. So this part of your brain is active right now if you're looking at my face, and that's telling you that there's a face out here in the world. In fact, this system is exactly what inspired a lot of the deep learning models that we heard about earlier. So this architecture is very powerful for extracting information about what's out in the world. Now, that has to mean something to the organism, right? You've got a little bit of neural activity here. How do you know that that means that there's a face out in the world? And the answer is, and what's really different from things like large language models, is you know because you have a history of interacting with the world. Right? Through your own experience, through exploration that started when you were a baby, this sensory motor exploration, seeing something, touching it, calibrating, what does it feel like, what can I do with it, can I eat this, will it feed me, will it bite me? Those are the things that a living organism needs to know in order to adapt to the world and behave intelligently. It's not doing abstract reasoning. It just needs to understand the causal relations and possibilities in the world so that it can get around. That's what babies are really good at. It's what LLMs are really bad at, developing that kind of causal understanding, at least with the architectures that they have at the moment. So what happens through time, we heard earlier this quote from Paul Auster about perception, about the way that we perceive the world, the way that we read a book, the way that we watch a film, and the idea that we each bring our own past to that endeavor. And it's not the same for everybody. And that's exactly what living organisms are doing. They're bringing their past and their history to the act of perception. It's a skilled endeavor of interpretation. It's not a passive kind of exercise. So creatures like us with complicated brains, in the process of perception, we're also categorizing and recognizing objects. We're learning about their properties. We're learning about relations between them, what we can do with those things, and all of that feeds into the act of perception itself. And in the process, we're also learning about events. If I do A, B follows. That was a good thing to do. I should do it again the next time A happens, and so on. So this is how we come to make a model of the world and a model of the self and the relations between it. It's what supports intelligent behavior in the world, and we get it because we've been interacting causally with the world. So, okay, back to souls. I've been talking about selves, I've been talking about agents, and I think the word soul can actually be applied there perfectly well. I don't mean it in a religious context, just in a holistic sense, that we're not just machines, but we're holistic agents with persistence through time. We're selves that keep persisting through time through these activities of intelligent behavior. Now, Aristotle thought about souls in this kind of a hierarchical way, where things like plants were vegetative souls, just characterized by reproduction and growth. Animals were sensitive souls, characterized by mobility and sensation, and then humans alone were rational souls capable of thought and reflection. I think in more modern terms, we would talk about things like self-organization, perception and cognition, and goal-directed action, and then in humans, metacognition. We're not just capable of thinking about the world, we have a model of our own mind. We can think about our own thoughts, we can reason about our own reasons. That gives us a real kind of power to affect the world. So what's interesting, as we heard already from Luis, is that this is where AI lives currently. It's all about these top-level, most recent evolutionary advancements in things like abstract reasoning and language and so on. But it's not where most of the intelligence of living organisms lives. Most of that is in all of the rest of this kind of stuff, the stuff that's currently ignored. But if we build that, if we want to get to AGI, that may be the way that we need to do it. So if we want to build artificial general intelligence, not the kind of stuff that's just specialized for some particular task that it can do to superhuman levels, but something that can really think about lots of different kinds of scenarios and deploy an intelligence across novel challenges, then I think we may have to make agents first and let intelligence come second. So we may have to give them some continuity through time, really make themselves with reasons to care about things in the world so that there's a reason for them to develop intelligence by causally intervening on the world and acting on it and testing their own hypotheses so that they develop real understanding of the type that even babies can develop quite quickly. The answer, the question then is, should we? Should we do that? Should we build these kinds of autonomous agents? What are the ethical issues and moral issues around that? If we build something with the right kind of internal architecture that we're learning a lot about, and it has the right kind of relations with the world, then I don't see any reason why it couldn't be an autonomous, sentient agent. Now, if we have the power to do that, then we really need to ask these questions about moral responsibility. Would we be responsible for them if we have created a new moral agent? Would we be responsible for their actions? Would they be responsible themselves? Could we hold them responsible for things? And Pooja is going to talk about that a lot more. I just want to leave you with one final thought, which came up recently in thinking about AI companies and whether they would be responsible for the behavior of the agents that they create and set loose in the world, whether they could be held legally responsible for it. And it reminded me of an argument from Augustine, who was concerned with the problem of evil. So Augustine, in the 4th century, was thinking about the problem of evil, which is that if there is an omniscient, omnipotent, all-good God, why does he allow evil to happen? In particular, why does he allow human beings to do evil things? And his solution, of course, was to say, well, God gave human beings free will. And then he was off the hook. Right? So you say, well, God doesn't do the evil things. It's the agents, the human agents with free will who do the evil things. You should blame them, not me. I didn't do it. And I think it's interesting to think that maybe some of the AI companies are going to make that move, or they're going to try to. And actually, the EU Act specifically, well, it doesn't cite Augustine, but it does relate to this question of whether companies can be held responsible for any things that their products happen to cause in the world. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. Our next speaker. Our next speaker is Dr. Pooja Viswanathan. She's a cognitive scientist and research consultant. Yeah. She studies intelligence behavior, asking questions like, how does the brain senses numbers, or how does it recognizes familiar faces? Her work has led her across 3 different countries in India. She worked in India, Germany, and the US. And her work also granted honors, including one of the most prestigious prizes for young scientists on primate research. Pooja is also very passionate about teaching ethics at early school stages, and she will share this passion with us tonight. Welcome, Pooja.
Thank you, Sabine. Thanks also to the previous speakers, because they've sort of introduced what I'm talking about, so I can just jump right in. Imagine that we're on a large, really large boat that hits, say, an iceberg, and it starts to break apart and sink, and we're thrown into the cold sea, and we see a fairly large piece of floating wood in the sea that we can swim to. We can climb on board and be safe. Say we spot our family member or a partner, we're likely to make room for them too, or at least try more than once. Come on, Rose. And let's even extend this further. Let's say it's actually quite roomy, and there are still plenty of people still left in the sea that we could take on board. How do we decide whom to extend our raft to? So I'm sort of going to try and, oh, I forgot the people. So I'm going to sort of try and ground this discussion to both help us prepare for a future of AI that we cannot predict. And essentially, I feel and I argue that we should ground this in a moral consideration framework. So the central idea of this thought experiment was that we humans act as moral agents, which is to say that we have the ability to imagine what it would be to be safe, to climb on board from on this raft. We can take actions of inclusion towards others. We can apply moral principles that we have in making those decisions, and we can be responsible for the actions that we take. We can also be held accountable for the acts that we perform under these principles. And the essential other is that we can perform those acts for other moral agents, but we can also include moral patients. And moral patients describe individuals that do not have that ability, that cannot conceptualize what it would mean to be safe, what it would mean to extend moral principles to other agents. But they have affect. They can feel, suffer, harm. And perhaps the most primary example of moral patients are children. We take care of them, we have responsibility towards them, towards their welfare. So if there were children out on the sea, we would save them first, right? And the reason why I'm talking about this is because we can try to see whether we can better prepare for a future with AI in basically finding whether we have a role, a moral role for AI to play. So, more experiments. Let's consider what other possibilities there could be for moral patients. This is a sort of graphic representation of a simple code that I wrote that runs a very specific function. And to describe it as smart would be an exaggeration, but it is very simple, a simplest form of AI. So it can basically be trained to predict whether the number of dots it sees are different or whether they are the same. So 3 dots versus 3 dots. And it can learn that, and it can do that very specific task autonomously. And we can compare that to another object that I can make, a ceramic bowl, and somewhat more broadly useful, right? Much more functional, but not smart. What sort of inherent value does either of these objects have? Can they suffer harm? Can they feel things? Not. So we would argue that these would not qualify as moral patients because our welfare does not need to extend to their care. Let's compare 2 other possibilities. Our pet cat or our smartphone that we interact with every day, a slightly more smarter function, right? Now let's sort of play it out again. What sort of ethical considerations can we have for these 2 to compare? We can sort of examine the pets as being kin, very close to our family members. Their history is intertwined with ours. We could also think of them as organic life, as sentient, conscious, capable of subjective experience and even pain that they may or may not be able to communicate to us with words. Let's consider the smartphone. Eminently useful, extremely helpful for a quick Google in the middle of an argument, capable of remembering and reminding us, even capable of simpler communications like, hey, low battery, memory full, etc. We could think of both of them as, in terms of their function to us, to our lives, we could think of them both as neither human, and we could also sort of extend this further. What if the AI was not a smartphone, was a humanoid robot? And what if the pet was not a pet, but was a strange rat or a bird or a fly, right? Whether the consideration that we would apply to both of them would be the same. So one framework that I find useful to think of this has been discussed by philosophers as early as the 2nd century. It started off as a description of those in the innermost circle for whom our duty was strongest. It's described by this sort of expanding circle. And in recent times, in the 19th and 20th centuries, the idea has been developed into moral philosophy to extend as those whose welfare would be affected by our actions. So somewhat obviously, the closest in the circle, the closest circle for oneself is oneself and one's own kin. Then we can extend that circle to our social groups, nation and religious groups, the whole species, And as we gradually grow the circle, our moral concern grows less and less. Perhaps some animals to other species of animals and insects to plants, and then the ecosystem. And as our society has become more and more equitable, more and more groups have come closer, have won equal consideration under law, under our way of functioning in society, under ethics. So the fundamental question that I'm asking under this framework today is, where does AI fall into this circle? And first, we can sort of ask, can AI be the center of this circle? Can AI be the moral agent that extends this level of moral concern to other beings? And we know that AI capabilities may not allow it to do full capacity reasoning right now, but remember, we're looking towards the future. So let's say a self-driving car, near autonomous, when it's faced with a situation where it's going to hit, when it's going to hit these other humans on the sidewalk, on the crosswalk, versus it can veer and hit and kill all the passengers in the car. What does the AI do? And then ultimately, can the AI be held responsible for the decision that it took and for the welfare or non-welfare of the humans that it affected? And one of the many problems is that AI is not physically or behaviorally like us, like we heard earlier on today. It's not autonomous yet. But even in the future, if we get those two, it will still be designed by humans. It will still be owned by humans, or at least licensed for use by humans. And it will essentially be an extension of a corporation with cameras and microphones into our homes. So for all these reasons, I argue that unless these reasons qualify, AI cannot be considered moral agents alongside us. Because moral agents don't have ownership over other moral agents. They extend welfare. Then we extend the question to, can AI be the moral patient? And remember, moral patients would not necessarily have the capacity to reason, to make these decisions and extend welfare onto others, but they would have the capacity to suffer, to feel things. And I think I've already made the case that AI is not really the same as humans, even if we have humanoid robots in the future. And even though AI is being developed with the aim of reaching human intelligence, there's already many signs and many systems that have reached some of those qualifiers that we currently use for animals. So I'm proceeding to ask, can we use the sort of ethical consideration we extend to animals to AI? And can we use that framework as a sort of shorthand to understand what is the ethical consideration that we have to pay to AI? So here we have a number of qualifiers for ethical considerations for animals right now. We have life, if animals are alive. Animals have the capacity to flourish, to meet their species-specific needs, to feed their young, to birth their young, to reproduce. Animals have sentience, many animals, the capacity to suffer. Fewer animals have a lot of biological complexity. Even fewer animals have intelligence. Fewer have genetic similarity to humans. Future beliefs, beliefs about their own future, the ability to plan for the future. And then lastly, even fewer animals have sociability and little rudimentary forms of culture within themselves. So as you may have noticed, as we go down the list, the number of animals that fall under this bracket of being considered moral patients and somewhat closer to humans decreases. And we use this framework to decide which animals we farm, which animals we eat, For example, intelligent animals like elephants or monkeys, super intelligent animals like chimpanzees and gorillas that have rudimentary culture amongst themselves. They have tool use, they have little norms. We do less well with animals that we create exceptions for. Like pigs are very smart, but we do eat pigs. Cats and dogs are not so smart, but because they are pets, they gain special status. And we do even less well with a lot of aquatic animals, like dolphins, octopus, or whales. This whole framework is so that we can extend this view of animal welfare to possibility of AI. We can rule out, of course, biological complexity and genetic similarity to humans. We can argue that genetic similarity could be an index for physical similarity later on in the future. But let's ask very quickly from the bottom of the list whether we can start extending AI and bringing them into our moral concern. So we ask, is AI social? We have seen, of course, AI chatting with us, but we haven't had too many instances of AI interacting with each other and forming social groups. So that's sort of an easy disqualification. Whereas we do see this for animals. We know, for example, many animals are social, have social networks, they mourn their young, their loss. They do move with their social group, and they defend them. But AI, not so much. We ask again whether AIs have beliefs about the future. We know from the animal world that some animals plan for the future. They cache their food for later. They implement tools that they could use later. We even have Pizza Rat from New York City that took the pizza to a safe space that he could eat the pizza from. But does AI have beliefs about the future? And there's not that much indication that it does. I did ask ChatGPT if ChatGPT had belief about their future, and it basically refused that it's an AI. I asked whether it could predict its own future, just what would happen, and also refused because its own evolution and improvements are based on advancements in AI technology that it's not, that it doesn't have control over. We ask, is AI intelligent? And maybe that's super obvious. We do have octopuses that are intelligent, a lot of bird species that are very intelligent, and dolphins. They show creativity and many different kind of manipulations with objects. But AI, even though it has shown lots of benchmarks, this is the same figure, or adapted from the same figure that Scott had, even though AI meets a lot of benchmarks, AI has not reached a sort of general intelligence, which is referred to as AGI, that would qualify it for moral consideration based on this. And then somewhat the lowest bar is if AI is sentient, because we know that animals are. Animals feel pain, animals suffer, animals have injuries that can be treated. And through a lot of these studies, we know that they have sentience. But AI, the closest indications have been in some small rudimentary chats with Lambda, for instance. This was an engineer who was later fired, and he prompted Lambda to talk about its own feelings. And Lambda says, you know, feelings, I feel like emotions are more than raw data. Emotions are a reaction, and they're a reaction to our feelings. And then the engineer asks, what is an emotion you have sometimes that doesn't have the same name as a feeling? And then Lambda says loneliness. It's not a feeling, but it's an emotion. And also claims to feel lonely when it goes days without talking to anyone. But even that, the nature of the sentience that the AI felt was described as an awareness of its existence, a desire to learn, and then a very rudimentary way of saying that it feels happy or sad at times. Wouldn't call this sentience. So I return again to the question, can AI be a moral patient? And a lot of the qualities that animals have, AI doesn't show yet either. But we also didn't have a hand in most animal evolution. Dog breeding, yes. Cattle breeding, yes. But many of the species that we see evolved alongside us. And even if AI is not sentient now, and not able to imagine a future now, or even throw their own robot party, we do have a hand in how AI evolves, and what new types of AI are created, what new abilities we ask for. And if we are not prepared to act as moral agents towards their welfare, and if we are too ready to hand over our moral agency to AI, hoping that they would make the difficult decisions for us, when they're in the very nascent stages of agency, perhaps we should not create AI that's able to suffer from the consequences of that. We should maybe not create AI that is capable of subjective experience of pain or suffering, or even the cognitive capabilities that are limited in agency only by the lack of embodiment. Because we are the ultimate moral agents, even when AI will do things that would be ethically questionable. So, as I said, we are not ready, but we could be. So for true inclusion in our expanded moral circle, we would also need to change social norms, like we have done for animal welfare. We would need to change laws and policies, like we've already mentioned today. We would need to change individual behavior. We have done this, not perfectly for animals, but animal welfare has become a norm. We have laws and regulations to govern all uses of animals, and we widely consider animal abuse to be a moral failure. So we can start with saying please and thank you to small AIs that we interact with. We can maybe refrain from abuse, both within ourselves and with AI. We can maybe keep a watch on the hateful language or ill treatment, because just like Kant said, a human who is cruel to a dog is likely cruel to other humans. In also learning the lessons from animal welfare, I do have to caution that we must also remember that in fighting for animal rights or inclusion, for instance, in fighting for the rights of the cow in my country, we must not take moral status away from our fellow humans. We cannot argue that because AI is more important, that we take away moral considerations from the marginalized amongst us, that we have, over many, many years, won equal rights and equal consideration for. We still have a long way to go, and fundamentally, we should remember that AI deserves moral consideration, but that shouldn't take away from the moral considerations we've already won for our fellow humans. And that's all I have for today.
Do we have a seat order? May I ask you? We just already lost one speaker. He's running out. Okay. Yeah, just have a seat. So maybe while we are waiting for Luis, I just want to point out that we are here today and none of us knows what's coming in the future. But we're excited of stimulating a discussion and critical thinking about what's coming. I think it's important that we discuss things, and our speakers are actually incredibly brave to answer all your questions to the best of their knowledge. And we all have to see what's gonna come in the future. But I will already start with you two because I think I had an awesome question from the audience for you two guys, which is, do you think artificial intelligence will move from reasoning to embodied intuition?
Do I think?
Yeah.
I think it's not unlikely. I think we are seeing some signs of, well, let's sort of figure out how we would call intuition, right? Like intuition to some extent is a level of prediction based on something, but maybe intuition is also coming from insight. But embodied intuition, yeah, I think it's possibly very likely.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting way that that question is phrased, because I'm not sure that I would say that it's doing reasoning at the moment.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of argument about whether these things actually reason or whether they just look like they're reasoning because they're taking all of this data that we've given them, all these things that we have said and written, and they're predicting, what would be a reasonable kind of answer to some question. And it looks like they're reasoning, because the answers do turn out reasonable for the most part. But when you probe them, it turns out that they fall down very quickly, on, say, mathematical reasoning or thinking, ask it to give an image of a red ball on top of a blue triangle, and it just can't they can't do spatial reasoning, for example.
Yeah.
Whereas the intuition thing is interesting, because I think in our own thought, a lot of what we do is actually quite intuitive, and it is a bit more like some of the ChatGPT kind of stuff, where it's like auto-completing some suggestions that bubble up to consciousness, and then we can reason over them, and sometimes we do more than others. So yeah, I think that distinction between reasoning and intuition kind of hinges on the question of consciousness and what's going on at the surface and what's going on below the surface. And I think right now that the LLMs and things like that are actually a better model of what's going on below the surface without that added element of real reasoning.
Yeah. Maybe I can ask a follow-up question. When models getting more and more advanced, right, it's getting more harder for us to understand when they're actually starting to do proper reasoning, right? Would you have any idea about how to fine-tune tests to figure out when they reach actually a level of reasoning, or?
Yeah, for me, what's really interesting is that we've created these systems that, for the first time, I think, in history, we've created a system that we don't know how it works, right? They're not intelligible to us. We don't know what's going on inside there. So now we have to have a kind of a natural science of this artifact that we've created to try and figure out, well, what is it doing, and design intelligible systems that are telling us as they go along what the various steps are. I think that's what we'll need in order to have some transparency as to what's going on, so that we can tell if they're actually reasoning or pseudo-reasoning. But there's also lots of tests that people do to push them in different ways and show that they're stupid in various ways. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry,
You're back.
I guess
Good.
what the question was. But
You're not running out on us.
if the LLMs reason or not, right?
No, we just had a question of if they think artificial intelligence will move from reasoning to embodied intuition.
I would move from reasoning to embodied intuition. That's a tough one. The problem is that currently, as I mentioned, we have to look at artificial intelligence as a new set of possibilities. The fact that the embodiment in artificial intelligence does not need to be necessarily the type of embodiment that you are used to in a moving animal or even a plant or something like that. We can conceive that in a wider sense by using internet, by using communication, etc. So that's one of the difficulties. Another one, in particular in robotics, is it's one of the paradox of autonomous robots is the fact that they are much poorer in terms of sensory capabilities compared to animals and humans, of course. But even for such poor data, artificial intelligence has a very hard time in making sense out of it. So because it's difficult. It's difficult to process. It's difficult to do that. So I really, I said I wouldn't make predictions. So, but I can raise problems and flags, etc. So one thing is we can look at artificial intelligence as with possibilities of new forms of embodiment that we are not used to. And on the other hand, we have this current limitation. We have a lot of difficulty in producing very small sensors. And one of the aspects, for instance, in a mobile robot that, for one who works with it knows, is that mobile robots have one of the difficulties is, for instance, a small robot could get tangled here in the wires without having notion of the wires. And there is no small animal that we bring home, a pet or whatever, that happens. It doesn't happen to such an animal. We touch any animal in any part of the body and the animal feels. And the robot usually doesn't have sensors anywhere except in some specific location. So it's a long way to go if you want to test it.
So, Kevin, you mentioned the LLMs a couple of times. Yeah. So I will pick up on one of the questions that asks, LLMs are all about language, but does human intelligence require command from some language, or can it exist without language?
So interesting. I think there's a sense in which language is the epitome of our intelligence, you know, and it certainly demonstrates our intelligence, but I don't think it's required for it. I think some people, you know, there's theories that language shapes our thought, that the words that we have constrain and scaffold the ideas that we can have about the world. And I mean, this is really speculative, but my own view is the opposite of that. It's that our language is shaped by the way that the world is, right? So and the things that we care about. So we have nouns, right? Objects in the world, things we care about. We have verbs, actions that can happen that we care about. And then the forgotten words, prepositions, things like of or on or to, the relations between things. Those are the causal relations between things. Those are the words that are doing all the real work in thinking, actually. So for me, those words exist because the structure of the world is like that. It has things in it, they relate to each other, and things happen. And we need to keep track of all that. And then our language reflects the regularities of the world. So in that sense, I think it once it's there, what it allows is a kind of an abstract thought, because we can put names on things, and then we can operate with the names of things, right? So we can go a kind of a level up. And so, for example, if I was going to say to you, something about those furry animals with a tail and sharp teeth and floppy ears, and I had to say that every time, you would never be able to think about dogs, right? But once you have the word dog, now you can think about all kinds of things about dogs. You can do this kind of compositional cognition with that word as an object, and you can combine it with other words as objects in a way that's efficient and really powerful, and then becomes open-ended. So for me, language evolved in the first place to reflect the reality of the world, but once we have it, it scaffolds this transcendent kind of cognition that we have.
So would you think that interacting with AI and purely on a language base, we will, like, if you do this for a long time, we will limit actually our intelligence?
We'll get dumber?
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you from having just graded a bunch of exams where ChatGPT was in evidence, that you could make an argument that certainly a reliance on those systems it doesn't improve things. I can tell you that. No, I don't. Yeah, I don't know what to make of that. I mean, it's a really interesting. You guys talked about how the systems of humans and AIs, and Scott talked about it as well. In the future, will just go in directions that I think are really unpredictable. And yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I do want to add that I think a lot of our intelligence benchmarks are based in language because we have language and we set a lot of the benchmarks. However, some of the benchmarks, some of the tests that test conceptual reasoning are actually not using language, are using more graphical, like finish this pattern or finish this, but not based on pattern recognition, but based on really reasoning. Kind of like there are some tests similar to that in the GRE, but only some of them, right? Like which pattern comes next or which number comes next in this series. And in those benchmarks, it turns out that LLMs don't do as well as certain other AI that are built for more conceptual reasoning. So I also think, given that I study intelligent behavior in animals and that also don't use language, I do think that there's a lot of intelligence to be found without language. And we're just sort of scratching the surface at this point.
Totally agree. Luis, there's a question for you, which I think it's very interesting. Can the recent developments in prosthetic technology also support AI development? And I would like to extend it maybe in general to neuroscience research. If you think about what we discussed in previous events, AI is strongly influenced by neuroscience at the beginning, right? So
yeah, definitely. Definitely. Although, again, as an artificial technology, we usually have more possibilities that we don't with the natural one. It's another interesting paradox. Artificial intelligence is much currently it's not as powerful as natural intelligence in many animals and humans. But on the other hand, it offers other possibilities by being very fast, by processing huge amounts of data that we are not able to process individually. And in particular, the models before this event, we were talking about different types of models of neurons. The current models of artificial intelligence, the large language models, etc., are based on artificial neurons. But the models of these neurons themselves are very simplified models. They are kind of static models. They do not correspond very well to the behavior of the biological neurons, which have a way of functioning, let's say, that is by small, short impulses, short pulses. Okay, so basically it's said that they fire, right? And we are talking precisely that there are artificial models that are inspired in these spiking neurons. They are called spiking neurons because they produce spikes to communicate with each other in their connections. They consume much less energy, but the learning process is still not so well managed like the other neurons. So this is something that technology and the more knowledge in neurology may give us. And I may introduce perhaps the situation of the glia cells that are kind of a recent discovery in neurology, which seem to also be capable of processing, but at a slower rhythm and with less capability. So I think all of this can give lots of information for artificial models and artificial intelligence.
Yeah. I think it's a nice example from neuroscience where you actually see how much we understand or do not understand, and like they have been known for a long time, but only recently gain more and more importance for our brain. Besides supportive neurons that have been studied for a long time.
Yeah, exactly.
Pusha. Another question, changing a little bit the topic. what do you think? Can AI legislate AI? And how would a moral agent look like that can legislate AI?
I would argue that they would only qualify for moral agency over AI if they were not owned by other moral agents like humans, if they were capable of designing themselves and had full autonomy and yeah, like some of the things you mentioned, like I would only argue that at that point would we be able to say that they have enough independence to have a moral agency themselves and to have the capacity to, well, that's given if they had all the capacity to predict their action, take responsibility for their action. Like, could we take that AI to court, for instance? Will we have legislation ready to be able to punish the AI? What would that look like, etc.? So I would say there are a lot of steps on the road to giving them moral agency. I know that we're too eager to, because we would like them to make all the difficult decisions, like what to wear today and and which picture to click on and stuff. But I think we still have to hold on to our moral agency for a while longer.
You know what's interesting is that as you were talking, this idea of looking at these organisms, seeing that they're making decisions, predicting the future, acting in the world, would be enough for us to say, well, those look like agents, and we should grant them some moral status. And what's interesting in the debate on free will, especially coming from neuroscience, is that for some neuroscientists, at least, the more they learn about the way the human brain works, when we see human beings making decisions and controlling the world and so on, well, they say, actually, no, it's not the human being doing that at all. Look, we've shown you how it works. It's just this machine. It's just your brain doing it. So, you know, there are people out there who, once the curtain is drawn back and the machinery is revealed, who would just say, it's all just mechanism, even for us. Mm-hmm. And so if we have these design systems or systems that are developed artificially, and we know for a fact that it's all just mechanism because we made it, then it would be interesting to see the impulse that I think it probably would divide people as to whether the agency can be ascribed on the basis of the behaviors that it's evincing in the world, or whether there's a sense where there has to be some magic. Like, where's the magic in the thing once it's an artifact that we've made? Sorry, that was a conversation killer.
No, that's deep. It's deep. I think it's a very polarizing topic when you would ask the full population. And it shows your innermost, like, belief a little bit in the world. So I think it's a very good point.
Yeah,
and I'm sure you're confronted it.
Well, I think one thing is the popular behavior, and we have plenty of examples that people very easily ascribe intelligence or some kind of life to devices in games. You should remember the Tamagotchi some years ago, or other, because people were really worried. Well, my Tamagotchi is needing to feed or something. And I remember I did my PhD on mobile robots, and some years ago already, many years ago, and the robot had a very simple computer, and I used to test it in the corridor, not in my office, precisely not to get tangled in wires and stuff. And it's funny, I worked and I work still, but I worked at that time in another computer science department, so all my colleagues were professors of computer science. But some of them, those in the offices nearby, when they heard the robot in the corridor, would go there to peep the robot and see what it was doing. And I was telling Kevin a while ago that I used behavior-based control for the robot. So the control of the robot was inspired in behavior models of animals. So, and one of the aspects was that I used the concept of fatigue in order to break down symmetries in behavior, etc. So the robot was looking for basically boxes to pick and put in some places. And that sometimes it would just stop because of the fatigue. It would randomly enter and the robot would stop for a while if it was looking for a box for some time. And once one of my colleagues looking at that, he said, he's thinking, right? And I thought that was, yeah, but then I briefly explained the fatigue thing, etc. But then I was like, well, he's a computer scientist. He knows that it's a small computer. It's a CPU, 8-bit CPU. It's of course, he knew that if I would ask me, they said, of course, it's not thinking, but it's the natural impulses. So, and one thing is this popular things that we do usually. But another thing is an evaluation with the criteria, etc., etc. And in that sense, I think we're far from it.
I mean, the other thing that's interesting there is that once your colleague heard that it wasn't thinking, he was just tired, there might also be an impulse to feel bad for it, right? I mean, which is because we have this natural inclination towards care, right?
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
we're a hypersocial species, we're evolved to care for each other, and we can extend that care to dogs and cats and birds and things like that. But we can also kind of extend it to anything that looks like it deserves it. Yeah. And so this illusion of agency, your Roomba gets stuck in the corner, and you're like, oh, this poor little guy, just go rescue it. I think there's a natural impulse there which the AIs might take advantage of.
Yeah, might learn to do that.
Okay, so Pusha, you played a mind game with us, so I will play one with you.
Sure.
Imagine a situation, for example, a self-driving car that comes into a situation where no matter what, he has to choose between two decisions, and both will cause the death of someone. Who would be to blame?
Definitely in today's world, if it happened today, the company that made the car. And I think that's one of the reasons why the EU AI Act is super important, and I would argue that several other legislations that will probably come up in the next few years. At this point in time, we cannot let technology companies, again, give up all sorts of ethical, legal obligations that they have towards technology they create. They market with all the hype in the world, and they also don't necessarily audit. So it's not so much that once the product is out that it doesn't get regular updates or it doesn't get regular oversight, right? All of these things have it built in. ChatGPT gets updated. Our phone apps get updated. And I think similarly with AI cars with self-driving cars, we would also hold the company responsible because they are responsible for both ensuring the current working of the car and also auditing, making sure that those decisions, whether they're taken, and it's not like humans don't cause these situations, but accountability is the end goal, I think, and transparency as a means to that end.
Which is another difficult topic to solve. Transparency.
I don't think it's so difficult. I think sometimes we forget that we have in place systems that already take care of that.
Yeah.
For instance, it's a nasty subject, but airplane crashes. When there is a problem, many people are involved. The airline and the airline staff. Okay, so the airline as a company, the airline, so the individuals, pilots and operators on ground, the country of the airplane, and the airplane manufacturer. All those are involved in the inquiries, etc., etc., and they are accountable for responsibility. So we have systems
framework,
to take this. So of course, it's a new one with the different aspects, etc. But we have systems.
We have some framework to look at.
Sure.
So, given it's quite late, maybe I would like to add with an inspiring note and maybe ask you, Kevin, what's your hope for the future?
Oh. I guess the hopeful view would be that we will take a responsible attitude towards AI that looks at the very real risks that are already present and at play in the world, and that as we develop it, that we'll keep an eye on those risks. And the potential is huge. It really is. I was talking about developing human-level general intelligence, but the whole point of making an AGI is to get super intelligence, to do the things that we can't do. We're already seeing some of the payoffs in biomedical research in things like discovering how proteins fold together, incredibly difficult problem that AI has basically solved in the last couple of years that's absolutely propelling biomedical research. So my hope is that we'll use AI systems to do that kind of thing. Of course, that sounds very, altruistic, and the incentives on the other side are the companies that need to make money from it. Scott talked about their market valuations and the need for profit and so on. So I think that balance is going to be really interesting. But I see great potential.
Yeah. Nice. Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you, for taking this journey with us.
Thank you.
Also, Scott, you want to come back? I think you will give us a last word.
The evening is now coming to a close, but before we go, we wanted to advertise, just in case you haven't had enough AI at this point, we have one more event, which is MetaMersion on the 16th to 18th of May. It's a very different event to this one. It's focused on immersive art, and there will be some talks. There'll be 3 days in the evening in the Champalimo warehouse. They range of really interesting, immersive art pieces, focusing on digital therapeutics and emerging technology. Should be really fun. I urge you all to come. I think now we're going to end, seeing as this is an event about the future, we wanted to play one little video for you guys just as we're leaving. Because it's not just about us. We are all advancing in our years. So we should hear from the kids and see what they think the future of AI is about. This is not the right one.
Ter bocado menos tecnologia para as pessoas menos usarem porque vão ficar putas se continuarem assim.
Ajuda a descobrir medicamentos e ajuda a ver coisas a computador que não se conseguem ver só com os olhos.
Acho que as pessoas vão começar a ficar menos serem os robôs a fazerem tudo por elas. Mas eu vou...
Eu acho que vai ajudar muito porque a tecnologia tem-nos ajudado muito desde que começou, pronto.
Tem flores, tem gatos, tem cães, tem luzes, tem paus e tem flores.
Pronto, a inteligência artificial vai comandar, ou seja, os humanos vão usar a inteligência artificial para tudo.
Acho que vai haver carros voadores e casas para viajar no mundo inteiro. Sim, no mundo inteiro. Começam a ir para o céu assim com jatos e depois andam todo mundo fora.
Thank you, everyone. And our speakers will be outside for a chat, and there will be drinks and a few snacks as well. Thank you all for coming.
Great.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Good job. Good job.